You ever think about what it's like to be stuck between a rock and a hard place? I mean, really stuck. Well, picture this. You're on an oil rig in the middle of the North Sea, and all hell breaks loose. That's exactly what happened on July 6, 1988, when the Piper Alpha platform turned into a nightmare that nobody saw coming. Let me set the scene for you. Piper Alpha wasn't just any oil rig. This bad boy was pumping out around 317,000 barrels of crude oil every single day. We're talking about a massive operation, folks. The platform sat about 120 miles off the coast of Scotland, and it was basically a floating city where 226 workers lived and worked in rotating shifts. These guys were the real deal, blue-collar workers who knew the risks but showed up anyway because, hey, somebody's got to keep the lights on, right? Now here's where things get dicey. On that fateful evening, the day shift was wrapping up, and the night crew was settling in. Everything seemed pretty normal, just another day at the office, or so they thought. But underneath all that routine, there was a ticking time bomb nobody knew about. So what went wrong? Well, buckle up, because this is gonna blow your mind. Earlier that day, a condensate pump called Pump A had been taken offline for maintenance. The safety valve had been removed for inspection and certification. Pretty standard stuff, right? Wrong. Here's the kicker. The work wasn't finished, and instead of putting the valve back or properly sealing the opening, the maintenance crew just slapped a blind flange on it. They documented it on a permit to work form. But here's the thing. That paperwork never made it to the night shift supervisor. Can you believe that? One piece of paper could have saved lives, and it got lost in the shuffle. Makes you wonder how many close calls we dodge every single day without even knowing it, doesn't it? Around 9:45 p.m., Pump B kicked the bucket, just stopped working. The night crew needed to get things running again, so they decided to fire up Pump A, but nobody told them about the missing safety valve. Nobody knew. When they started that pump, condensate started leaking out of that blind flange like water through a sieve. Within minutes, the gas cloud was building up, looking for any excuse to ignite. And boy, did it find one. At 10 p.m. sharp, the gas ignited. The explosion was so massive that workers said it felt like the whole platform jumped out of the water. Doesn't that just give you the chills? 1 second you're doing your job, the next second your whole world is literally exploding around you. The initial blast tore through the platform like it was made of cardboard. Fires erupted everywhere. But here's where it gets even worse, if you can imagine. The explosion damaged the firewall that separated the different modules on the platform. That firewall was supposed to contain any fires and give workers time to evacuate. Without it, the flames spread like wildfire on dry grass. Within 20 minutes, things went from bad to catastrophic. The risers connecting Piper Alpha to two other platforms, Tartan and Claymore, ruptured. These pipelines were pumping gas at high pressure, and when they broke, they started feeding the fire with fresh fuel. It was like throwing gasoline on a bonfire, except this bonfire was already the size of a football field. You know what's crazy? The operators on those other platforms could see what was happening. They watched Piper Alpha burning, but they couldn't shut off the gas. Why? Because the emergency procedures said they needed permission from the offshore installation manager on Piper Alpha before shutting down. But the control room on Piper Alpha was gone, destroyed in the first blast. Talk about a catch-22 situation, am I right? The heat was so intense that steel beams started melting. We're talking about temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The platform was literally being consumed by fire, and the workers had nowhere to go. The helideck, which would have been the obvious escape route, was engulfed in flames. The lifeboats? Most of them were inaccessible or damaged. So what did these brave souls do? They faced an impossible choice. Stay on the burning platform and hope for rescue, or jump 175 feet into the freezing North Sea waters. That's like jumping off a 15-story building into an ocean that's cold enough to give you hypothermia in minutes. What would you do in that situation? Seriously, what would you do? 62 men made the jump. They chose the slim chance of survival in the water over certain doom on the rig. Some survived the fall, but didn't make it through the cold. Others were picked up by rescue vessels that rushed to the scene. These rescue crews were absolute heroes, sailing straight toward a burning inferno to save whoever they could. The platform kept burning for 3 more days. 3 whole days of uncontrolled fires fed by ruptured gas lines. Firefighting vessels sprayed millions of gallons of water, but it was like trying to put out the sun with a garden hose. The whole structure eventually collapsed into the sea, taking with it any hope of finding more survivors. When the smoke finally cleared, the The numbers were devastating. Out of 226 workers on the platform that night, only 61 survived. We lost 167 men in one of the worst offshore disasters in history. 2 brave rescue workers also perished trying to save others. These weren't just numbers on a page, folks. These were fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, guys who kissed their families goodbye thinking they'd see them in a couple weeks. Now you might be wondering, what did we learn from all this? Well, the investigation that followed was exhaustive. Lord Cullen led a public inquiry that didn't pull any punches. The findings were pretty damning. The permit-to-work system had failed spectacularly. Communication between shifts was a mess. The safety systems that were supposed to protect workers were inadequate. The decision to keep pumping gas from other platforms while Piper Alpha burned was flat out wrong. But here's the thing that really gets me. This wasn't just about mechanical failure or a freak accident. This was about a culture that prioritized production over safety, deadlines over lives, profits over people. Sound familiar? It should, because that kind of thinking still exists in too many places today. The Cullen Report made 106 recommendations to prevent something like this from ever happening again. The offshore oil industry got a complete overhaul in terms of safety regulations. The whole permit-to-work system was redesigned. Safety case regulations became mandatory, meaning companies had to prove their operations were safe before they could operate. Emergency shutdown procedures were simplified so that operators could act immediately without waiting for permission. Does all this regulation mean we're completely safe now? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Safety has improved dramatically, no doubt about it. But offshore oil work is still one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. You're working with highly flammable materials under extreme pressure in the middle of the ocean. One mistake, one overlooked detail, and boom, you're in trouble. The legacy of Piper Alpha lives on in every safety briefing, every inspection, every piece of protective equipment used on offshore platforms today. Those 167 men didn't perish in vain. Their tragedy forced an entire industry to wake up and smell the coffee, to realize that cutting corners isn't worth the cost. Every year on July 6th, people gather to remember what happened. There are memorials in Aberdeen, Scotland, where many of the workers came from. Families still feel the loss decades later. Some survivors still carry the physical and emotional scars. Can you imagine living through something like that and then having to go back to normal life? How do you even begin to process that kind of trauma? But you know what? Those survivors and the families of those who didn't make it have shown incredible strength. They've kept the memory alive, not just as a tragedy, but as a lesson. They've made sure that the oil industry never forgets what happens when safety takes a back seat. The Piper Alpha disaster changed everything. Before July 6, 1988, offshore safety was often an afterthought. After that date, it became priority number one. Was the price too high? Absolutely. Should it have taken a disaster of this magnitude to force change? No way. But that's the reality we live in sometimes. Sometimes humanity only learns the hard way. So the next time you flip on a light switch or fill up your gas tank, maybe take a second to think about where that energy comes from. Think about the people who risk their lives to extract it from the depths of the ocean. Think about those 167 men who went to work one day and never came home. This is the story of Piper Alpha. A story of tragedy, heroism, failure, and ultimately, change. It's a reminder that safety isn't just a checklist or a regulation. It's about people. Real people with real families who deserve to come home at the end of their shift. What do you think? Has the industry learned its lesson, or are we just waiting for history to repeat itself? Only time will tell, my friend. Only time will tell.